The following incidents and events depicted are true to historical fact. However, not all incidents had clips or photographs. Contemporaneous footage and artistic renditions will be used to represent those incidents. A complete bibliography, as well as the link to the previous episode, are included in the video description. A rock and roll singer, riding high on a recent national chart hit, as well as an appearance in a high-profile musical, holds close to 20,000 Chicago teens in attendance, spellbound. It is Gene Vincent, and his performance was electric. The former Vincent Eugene Craddock hunched over his microphone, at once suggestively and menacingly breathing and moaning over the lyrics to songs such as the bluesy Woman Love, and shouting out with "Hold me, hug me, rock me," while leering at the audience. At one point, Vincent pulled up his pants leg, revealing the metal brace where he had sustained a leg injury during his time in the United States Navy. The leg never healed, and Vincent drowned out the chronic pain with alcohol, but he also incorporated the partially handicapped and mangled leg into his act, at one point rolling his eyes back up and collapsing to the floor in a seeming faint while slowly convulsing, suggestively thrusting his torso up and down to the beat of the music, simulating a love act with the stage floor before rising to his feet to belt out his biggest hit, the iconic rockabilly number that he had co-written while drunk, and looking at a popular comic strip character, Bee Bopalula. Vincent's teenage audience went wild, screaming so loudly that his breathy vocal delivery could barely be heard as they jumped out of their seats, crowding the stage, reaching for him and jitterbugging in the aisles. The teens that made up the majority of the packed audience at the Chicago Stadium were indeed his audience, despite Vincent being just one of several music acts that Sunday of April 28, 1957. Also on stage at the Chicago Stadium were the local Chicago vocal group The Highlights, who had scored hits with ballads such as City of Angels and To Be With You, and balladeer Nick Noble, who Life magazine covering the event photographed just outside of the stadium, signing autographs for eager young fans, while local disc jockey Howard Miller of WIND signed autographs for the enthusiastic fans who crowded around the stage inside the arena itself. Rhythm and blues saxophonist Syl Austin wailed and honked on his sax, giving the young fans another opportunity to dance in the aisles like they would for Gene Vincent's rockabilly numbers, as they did for rhythm and blues singer Vicki Nelson. Betty Johnson and iconic lounge singer Mel Torme, who would later attempt to jump onto the specifically teen market and rock and roll bandwagon 2 years later by appearing in the 1959 exploitation film Girls Town, gave the teenage audience a chance to swoon and sway to their ballads, while also providing the adults in attendance music styles that they could relate to. However, judging by the wild reactions from the youthful audience, it was rockabilly singer Gene Vincent who was truly the star of the show. If his suggestive stage antics ran the risk of offending the adults in attendance, it is surprising to note that it was the adult sponsors, one of whom was the local Kiwanis Club, who actually suggested to the teen organizers of the event that acts like Gene Vincent be hired in order to ensure the event's success with the intended target audience, the teenagers of the local Chicago area, particularly those teens who today would be termed as at risk for joining street gangs. For this event was not just a concert. The April 28, 1957 show at the Chicago Stadium wasn't simply a concert along the lines of a Dick Clark Caravan of Stars roadshow, nor an Alan Freed concert at the Brooklyn Paramount, where the music was solely, exclusively the focus of the event. As reported in the May 20, 1957 issue of Life magazine, The event of that Sunday, April 28, 1957, was a youth rally, the third in fact, organized by the local teens themselves, the organizers being students from the various local Catholic high schools in the area. Life magazine noted that the Chicago Youth Rally was organized in an effort to fight juvenile delinquency, with rock and roll, and particularly a performance by Gene Vincent, used to attract and keep the attending teens interested and excited as the organizers spread their message of good, decent behavior, and what we would refer to today as gang outreach, a regular program of many of today's inner-city church youth programs, but of particular interest to American inner cities in the 1950s. Local teen leaders such as Mendel Catholic High School senior and co-chair of the event, Tom Osborne, and Alvernia Catholic High School's Judy Cruzel both gave speeches that sought to inspire and even challenge their fellow teens to stay clear of the temptations of inner-city street life, while assuring the adults in attendance that the youth of their generation, often vilified in the press due to recent reports of violent gang activity, were, by and large, in the majority, generally law-abiding, whose ambitions worked towards the betterment of society. The teen organizers had even brought on several notable adults to give speeches prior to the performances by the rock and roll acts. Top middleweight boxers, champions in their weight divisions at different times during their careers, and rivals, Sugar Ray Robinson and Gene Fulmer, were on hand to give speeches about how playing the game fairly, as opposed to winning, was the most important outcome, both in and outside of the ring. The two boxers would meet 4 days later in that same arena, with Robinson emerging victorious over Fulmer in the 5th round, a rematch victory over a previous defeat at the hands of Fulmer 5 months earlier at New York's Madison Square Garden. Hollywood celebrities such as young leading man Robert Wagner and then Warner's contract player Tab Hunter were also in attendance, signing autographs and giving the local event a touch of out-of-town Hollywood glamour, which was covered by local Chicago area TV stations. Another notable adult in attendance was, unlike the celebrities, a local, Judge Wendell Green, the first African American to serve as a judge on the circuit court level. 6 years before, Green had presided over a highly publicized and politically charged case, the People versus Moretti, which involved the 1951 shooting death of a 15-year-old Hispanic teenager, Arthur Jamino, by police officer Michael Moretti. Green was especially concerned over causes regarding youth crime and racial divisions, and as he led the Chicago teens in a group pledge of good behavior, following on the heels of hymn singing, which was led from the stage in which the audience participated, a recent case of teen gang violence was surely on Green's mind. A month earlier, on March 11, 1957, a 17-year-old Farragut High School honor roll student by the name of Alvin Palmer had been attacked while waiting for a bus after finishing his after-school job. 15 teenagers were charged with the attack, and one of the accused, 18-year-old Joseph Schwartz, who reportedly yelled out the N-word while beating Palmer to death with a ball-peen hammer, would receive a 50-year sentence for the crime. The racial component of the case was not lost on the press, with reporters, as well as local city leaders, drawing comparisons with other cases of racially charged violence, some of which had involved school integration in the Deep South and, like juvenile delinquency, was another youth-oriented subject that was in the national mind at the time. The racial component of the murder would come back in the national headlines later that year, when a white and partially handicapped teenager, 15-year-old Michael Farmer, would be murdered by primarily Hispanic and African-American teens in Highbridge Park, New York. And the following year, when a South Korean foreign exchange student would be murdered by a gang of black teenagers in Philadelphia. It was these political ramifications and issues of race and youth crime that weighed on the minds of the organizers of the event, and it was amidst this environment
with the Alvin Palmer murder trial still going on at the time leading up to the youth rally, that Judge Wendell Green led the oath of good citizenship to the nearly 20,000 teenagers in attendance.
Black and white teenagers together at the Chicago Stadium made every effort to show solidarity, and surviving photographs by the press noted both the integrated, ethnically mixed nature of the stadium's teen audience, as well as the fact that despite the wild enthusiasm, no incidents of violence by the audience was reported, which might have been a novelty to the reporters in attendance, since usually when the 1950s press did extensive reports on rock and roll shows, associations with juvenile delinquency, as opposed to the idea of rock and roll helping to prevent youth crime, was the focus, such as the 1956 San Jose, California Fats Domino concert at the Palomar Ballroom, when the show's organizers oversold tickets beyond capacity while simultaneously selling alcohol to the attendees in line, many of whom would be denied entrance to the show after paying. The result were several reports of assault and property damage at that concert from the previous year and across the country in California. The third annual youth rally at the Chicago Stadium on April 20th, 1957 had no such incidents of youth violence, and the message of youth solidarity with rock and roll garnered national attention and seemed to, temporarily at least, create a sort of truce in the popular media of the time between the press and the then exclusively youth-oriented music which was rock and roll, in reality a rebranded form of African American rhythm and blues, its cultural origins not lost on segregationists who, like other politicians who claimed to be defenders of decency, were in very public opposition to the music genre.
The obscenity and vulgarity of the rock and roll music is obviously a means by which the white man and his children can be driven to the level with the Negro. It is obviously Negro music.
The brief truce between the adult press and the teen music genre was short-lived. The following year, rock and roll would be under attack again, with accusations of its causing, or at least attracting, juvenile delinquency. A now legendary concert, this one at the Boston Arena, and hosted by the disc jockey who is often credited with rebranding black rhythm and blues with the rock and roll colloquial phrase, in order to sell the music to white teenagers, would be the focus of the public's outcry and renewed accusations between rock and roll and juvenile delinquency. That later concert in Boston would be beset by many problems, not the least of which was actual harassment by Boston city officials. However, unknown, and certainly unwelcome by the show's promoter and host, the disc jockey Alan Freed, a notorious Boston street gang and their rivals had decided to use the Boston Arena and Freed's controversial rock and roll concert as the location to violently settle their differences. It would be just one more incident in a string of incidents that would end Freed's career. The following year, Freed would be charged with bribery during the Payola scandal of 1959. However, that concert would also mark the beginning of the end of the dominance of harder-edged, black rhythm and blues-based, and regional, working-class, white country and western-based rock and roll on the nation's pop charts, towards music chart domination by a more suburban, upper-middle-class, softer, pop-oriented and less threatening version of rock and roll. This softer, pop-based form of manufactured teen music, led by Philadelphia television host Dick Clark, would hold sway until the British invasion of 1964. The irony of this perceived less threatening version of teen music was that it was often controlled behind the scenes by organized crime, and it is this sound that is often remembered in today's mainstream nostalgic recollections when referencing the harmless, quaint, and unintentionally irrelevant music of the 1950s. This is how the public fear of juvenile delinquency in the 1950s shaped the direction of rock and roll. This is part 2 in the nostalgic Myths and Historical Reality series, Juvenile Delinquency.